But all right, so we'll introduce Chris. So Chris is a trial lawyer at Bassford Remmel law firm in Minneapolis, where he has worked since 1993. After completing a clerkship at the Minnesota Court of Appeals, and Chris and his wife, Sarah, have two children, a son who recently graduated from the University of Minnesota with a psychology degree, and a daughter who is studying animal science at the U of M agricultural campus. Outside of work, he spends much of his time with his family farm south of Dassel, Minnesota, tapping maple trees. I think Pete and Chris are going to connect on that in the spring, and fishing in the area lakes in the summer, and splitting wood year round, which I'm curious about that. I didn't know that, but please welcome Chris.
Well, if you're going to evaporate sap, you need wood to fire it. That's the explanation there. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for braving the cold. Good morning to everybody in Zoom land. Some of you are in warm spot. I can't imagine better timing than a day like today to hear about baseball. It's a cold day, but the Twins are in spring training. Hope springs eternal, like always. And I'm really excited to hear about from our speaker and about some baseball history. I thought I knew quite a bit about baseball history in Minnesota and town ball. My first job ever was as a Little League umpire, and I did that throughout high school. Collected old baseball cards. Probably would be a millionaire if my mom hadn't thrown them all away after I moved out. But let me just briefly introduce our speaker. So Pete Gorton is a Negro League historian and founder of the Donaldson Network, a group of amateur historians dedicated to the rediscovery of the lost baseball career of John Wesley Donaldson. And as I say, I thought I knew about history, but I'd never heard of this guy before. So we're about to hear a lot about it. Pete has spent more than 20 years conducting research on this fellow on a daily basis. So I can't imagine there's a more in-depth historian in America that could talk about this. He's a recipient of the Society for American Baseball Research Negro Leagues Committee Tweed Webb Lifetime Achievement Award for preserving the history of the Negro League. The Center for Negro League Baseball Research called the Donaldson Network the most extensive research project that has ever been undertaken related to Black baseball. Bob Kendrick of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City says the Donaldson Network brought John Donaldson back to life. And John Donaldson plays a great role in the history of not only of our sport, but in the history of our country. MLB.com calls the Donaldson Network and the John Donaldson pot of gold. So Pete's work can be found in numerous books and publications and on informative social media accounts like X, formerly Twitter, at the Donaldson Net, Facebook, and YouTube, with more discoveries being unearthed daily. Pete lives in New Brighton with his wife, Kelly, and two high school children, Francis and Samuel. I understand Samuel is a baseball player. I tried to find out about his day job, and I heard mention about being an audiovisual concierge. So ask Pete about that after his talk. He's got a fascinating career aside from this, but I don't think he's going to mention much about it. And I did find out he's got a much more extensive maple syrup operation in Wisconsin than I do in Minnesota, but that's for another day. So welcome, Pete.
Thank you, Chris, for having me this morning. How many in this room had ever heard of John Donaldson before today? Come on, where's a hand? Somebody. Well, I'm here today to tell you that we as a society have forgotten about who John Donaldson was, and his legacy can be restored. We're going to move this thing along. There we are. Thank you very much. I'm here today to tell you history has collectively forgotten about him, his impact on who we are today. However, this is changing each and every day. John Donaldson said, "When I go out there to play baseball, it is not unusual to hear some fans cry out, 'Hit the dirty N-word.' That hurts, for I have no recourse. I am getting paid, I suppose, to take that, but why should fans become personal? If I act the part of a gentleman, am I not entitled to a little respect? It's time to give him what he asked for, a little respect." John Donaldson was a ball player. He possessed the physical skills to play at baseball's highest levels. The segregated era prohibited him from showcasing his talent in the major leagues. In turn, what the major leagues lost was small town America's gain. Equally important, but not equally remembered. Hitters were looking down the barrel of a gun. And incidentally, the film footage you just shot was shot in Fergus Falls, Minnesota on August 16th, 1925. So welcome our friends from Fergus Falls. Today, I'll tell you how we at the Donaldson Network are working to solidify the legacy of John Wesley Donaldson and how discovery, compilation, and interpretation will change how we view his legacy forever. Today, I'm going to introduce to you three concepts, right? The first is Negro League ball players are equal to Major League ball players. The second is the greatest colored pitcher in the world. And third, don't take their legacies away again. I just lost my name tag. I need a button. Okay. Our effort continues the legacy restoration for John Donaldson, who during his time endured being on the outside looking in. But today, we stand with him. Moving forward, our experiences of John Donaldson can be a beacon of discovery for other Black ball players to introduce and solidify their careers. Donaldson's legacy will continue to grow now as a catalyst for those who integrated, those who are on the outside looking in on the opposite side of the color line. First, I want to talk about our three concepts. Negro League baseball players' abilities were equal to that of white Major League ball players, without a doubt. But let me tell you about a few of the ball players. Walter Ball was from St. Paul. He personally had the color line drawn on him in 3 different leagues. George Chappie Johnson played all over the country and starred with the Philadelphia Giants, Chicago Unions, and Page Fence Giants, but few realize he also starred in Long Prairie, Minnesota. Bobby Marshall was a powerhouse athlete who was not only a baseball talent, he was a hockey player too. Marshall was the first Black All-American ever in college football history at the University of Minnesota. Few recognize these stories. Each would have had major league careers. In December of 2020, Major League Baseball acknowledged the legitimacy of Negro League baseball players. In 2020, a significant moment in the history of our national game. Each of the players I've mentioned had roles in the integration of baseball, and each were influential in setting the foundation for the career of John Donaldson. In the major leagues, where winning baseball games matters most, owners and managers wanted John Donaldson for their teams. Representatives of the New York Giants, the Chicago Cubs, the Chicago White Sox, Washington Senators, Detroit Tigers, as well as affiliates in Colorado, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota were all known to have endorsed him. Each and every franchise knew a lightning throwing shutdown left-hander would help them win. But Donaldson was, like others before and after, would become casualties of segregation in the major leagues. Because of this, we set out to discover and document and publicize John Donaldson's career. Today, he is known to have won 428 games in his amazing 33-year career that began in 1908 and finished in 1941. His 5,295 verifiable strikeouts, place his win and strikeout totals as the most of any segregated pitcher in the history of baseball. Yet no one in this room knows who he is. John Donaldson is known to have played for 60 different teams, 6-0. Segregation did this. Satchel Paige, who in 1971 was the first black ball player elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And he said in his induction speech, "I had a world of my own. The major leagues didn't want me." This exclusion did not make any difference to Satchel Paige, saying, "I was satisfied in my world the way it was." In this same way, John Donaldson experienced a similar world. This is not the world most people today think it was. This was John Donaldson's world. Each dot represents a town and city that he played in. Here are the Rotary chapters, as we all know, in Minnesota. Here are all the places where John Donaldson played in Minnesota. He played in over 766 different cities in North America. John Donaldson brought big league quality baseball to this world. Because of segregation, he and others who looked like him were forced to play anywhere but on a major league field. This meant John Donaldson's considerable talent could be seen in some faraway places. Here's one photo of Beach, North Dakota, right? Just one example of where the color line forced Donaldson and other black stars to perform somewhere, anywhere, but the lily white major leagues. The second concept I want you to remember, what made John Donaldson the greatest colored pitcher in the world. He was born in Glasgow, Missouri in 1891. And Glasgow is a city on the sharpest bend of the Missouri River, located in north central Missouri, a state with values of the antebellum South, where staunch segregation was the order of the time. He grew up watching games here at Hanukkah's ballpark. John Donaldson was college educated. He attended George Smith College in Sedalia, Missouri, a seminary college for the Methodist AME Church. John Donaldson's mother, Ida, wanted him to be a preacher, but his baseball abilities had other plans. He would gather himself another type of convert, baseball fans, and Donaldson's ability on the field had never quite been seen by fans, and his message would be deeply centered in equality. After a couple of dominating years in Glasgow, where we have yet to find a game where he didn't strike out 15 batters, he joined Brown's Tennessee Rats and immediately began grabbing headlines, barnstorming throughout the Midwest. And here he is on the left-hand side of the picture. The Rats played a ball game in the afternoon and entertained with a minstrel show in the evening. Donaldson's record that summer was 41-3. Including a 31 strikeout game in Humboldt, Iowa. Everybody knows there's only 27 outs in a major league, in a major baseball game. This was an extra inning game, 31 strikeouts. Papers said John Donaldson was the greatest tosser of tantalizers the locals had ever faced, some going as far to call him the greatest colored pitcher in America. In 1912 was the first season of the World's All Nations. This club was composed of members of several different ethnic groups. They conducted themselves in true democratic style. They ate, slept, traveled, played ball games, and lived together as a family. Much like major league teams are today, they come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. This is the Pullman coach train car, which allowed them to make money without breaking local blue laws or any of Jim Crow laws. The All Nations were sponsored by the Schmelzer's Arms Company of Kansas City, Missouri. Not only did the store sell guns and ammunition, the team helped get their catalogs in front of a baseball crazy public. The ball club acted as a marketing arm, and to this day, antique Schmelzer's sporting goods can still be found in areas where the team traveled. Schmelzer sold uniforms, balls, bats, gloves, and the company's catalog business helped lead the expansion of baseball in our country as we became baseball mad in the first few decades of the 20th century. The barnstorming All Nations, led by John Donaldson, thrilled crowds across the country. He was the living face of the catalog company. Donaldson was the star for their catalog business, and correlations can be made to Nike and Michael Jordan 75 years later. Soon, John Donaldson would become a sensation wherever the Smelters Arms Company book a game. His $150 a month salary meant he made a very good living as a black ball player. It was said that he used his money to build a decent home for his mother. He struck out more than 500 batters a year from 1912 through 1914, and probably included a third or fourth season in 1915. With the All Nations, John Donaldson pitched 7 of his known 14 no-hitters. His lightning fastball was one of 4 major league quality pitches that he possessed. The others being a changeup, a curve, and what has become known as the slider. And I'm here to tell you, John Donaldson's slider could get any hitter out in any era, anywhere. It was in a more important sense, John Donaldson controlled the game wherever he pitched. He controlled the game, and this made people uncomfortable, and in fact scared them. In a time when white America held all power over black America, John Donaldson was a force for integration. In 1916, the Chicago Defender stated what we all know is obvious today. The All Nations had demonstrated to the world one thing in particular. It is that it is possible for black and white to play professional baseball in harmony on one team. Before, they didn't think that was possible. John Donaldson's team shows that. This is one of 9,000 known articles about the career of John Donaldson. They wrote about him in the newspaper a lot. This article blames Chicago's baseball owners, saying it's their own fault their teams were terrible, right? And color phobia kept the Cubs and Sox from success on the field. In 1916, John Donaldson challenges segregation in baseball, yet continues to live as a black man in his own world, a black man in America. Everywhere the All Nations went, they proved that integration was possible. In 1920, the pitcher with the most strikeouts to his name, walking on planet Earth, John Donaldson is a founding member of the new infamous Kansas City Monarchs, set to play in the newly formed Negro National League, the first sustained league of its kind, and celebrated in 2020 for its 100th anniversary. It was said that John Donaldson suggested the team name. Donaldson's 5-tool ability anchored the Monarchs, pitching, playing center field, and even batting cleanup. Shortly after the founding of the Negro National League, the Monarchs ran into financial trouble, much like any new business might. They were lucky to have the most valuable player in the world. These financial woes forced management to look for alternate incomes, and the decision was made to send John Donaldson back to the lucrative barnstorming roots of the previous decade. This time with Donaldson as a player manager of the retooled All Nations team, acting as a proving ground for the Kansas City Monarchs. In 1922 and 23, the All Nations team made money for the Monarchs, traveling the Midwest. John Donaldson was a known profit maker outside of the Negro National League, and this lessened his dependence upon it. And in May of 1924, the headline reads, "Donaldson quits the Monarch Club." Probably tired of facing another summer with the All Nations, now traveling by automobile, but certainly due to his contract in Bertha, Minnesota, the local business leaders, eager to entice the black Christy Mathewson, started a special bank account and saving for Donaldson's contract 3 years prior to his arrival in Bertha. In 1924, as a star pitcher for the Bertha Fishermen, they won the Minnesota State semi-professional title. The daily newspapers of Minneapolis and St. Paul reported on nearly every game. This brought fame and recognition to Bertha and to the region. Bertha's management banked on it, and Donaldson made $1,478 that summer, and his record was 21-3. His salary was more than all of his white teammates combined. Before leaving Minnesota a few years later, his monthly salaries were said to have topped $750 a month. John Donaldson was a major league star exiled in small town America. He is constantly integrating everywhere he goes. John Donaldson's All-Stars formed in 1930, which is the same uniform as this. The club cashed in on his fame and reputation, which included head-to-head matchups with his former team, the Kansas City Monarchs, whom he eventually rejoined, and he donned a Monarchs uniform, and here he is standing third from the back in the back row. John Donaldson mentored hundreds of black ball players throughout his career. Among those, the most well-known black pitcher, Satchel Paige. Donaldson's experience and knowledge of the barnstorming roots of the Midwest helped build the legacy of what we know today as Satchel Paige. Does anybody in this room know who Satchel Paige is? Right? For the Zoom audience, that was a bunch of hands that went up. Paige suffered an arm injury, serious enough that Monarch management gave him one more shot at recovery and called on John Donaldson to help work him back into shape. With John Donaldson's ever watchful eye, Satchel's arm slowly recovered and kept on pitching for another 2.5 decades, which included a Major League Baseball stint and a World Championship. In 1945, while working in the Chicago Post Office, Donaldson watched Jackie Robinson break the color lines surrounding the game for over 70 years. And on June 22nd, 1949, John Donaldson was hired as the first full-time black scout in Major League Baseball history. Nobody knows that. He scouted some of the greatest players ever: Willie Mays, Henry Aaron, Ernie Banks. He signed dozens of players destined to integrate the game. His perseverance within the game lasted nearly a half a century, leading to his retirement, where he was known to have continued teaching the game to children at Washington Park as a coach within the Chicago Parks Department. Gave it back. Segregation made certain that the legacy of John Donaldson would fade away. I'm here today to tell you this is exactly what happened to the greatest colored pitcher in the world. This is what happened to John Donaldson's legacy. But that leads us to the third concept. Segregation prohibited Negro Leagues players the opportunity to have lasting legacies in the eyes of history. I'm here today to reassure you that we are not going to let this happen. We cannot allow modern memory to nullify contributions. We must restore and not minimize, not marginalize. Our segregated past, this historical stain, can no longer hold John Donaldson. However, today there is a problem with his legacy. Critics and skeptics judge his career this way, and it's a simple dismissal of one of the all-time greats. This determination is based on where he played and not how he played. They said it was impossible to find records of players during Donaldson's time, but we know now this is no longer true. Proof from this from the Star Tribune in 1971, and columnist Dick Cullum, he said it's impossible to find these records. That may have been, that is no longer the case. We built the Donaldson Network with legacy restoration as our goal. We have collected information from 31 states and provinces, totaling nearly 2,500 games. We have over 9,500 articles related to the career of John Donaldson, contributed by hundreds of people from literally around the world. We have found games in his career thought to be impossible. Future generations will have the opportunity to learn from our experience and continue with a model for other Black baseball research. Donaldson's legacy restoration will serve as a blueprint for legacy restoration of other Black ball players, a legacy that can change the future. Last year, Sony PlayStation, we got any Sony PlayStation fans in the crowd? You never know. PlayStation asked if we would contribute to MLB The Show 23, a video game platform, the most popular video game, baseball video game. Since then, The Show 23 was awarded Sports Video Game of the Year by several prominent gaming experts. The game includes 8 Negro League players and includes John Donaldson, along with Jackie Robinson, Satchel Paige, and others. When the release video was announced, it was quickly viewed several million times. The newest, most viewed in John Donaldson's legacy restoration effort. Several million times people heard the name John Donaldson for the first time. Here is what batters saw when they faced John Donaldson. This is a slider. The ball appears to be outside and then darts back, right? It is difficult to make solid contact, and John Donaldson made hay with this pitch for decades. Remember, he won more games and struck out more batters than any segregated pitcher in the history of the game. MLB The Show will be releasing new versions in a week or so of the game, and yearly for the next 4 years. John Donaldson was rightly chosen for the inaugural version of the game for Negro Leagues players. We will be working with Sony to make each version better than the last. Also, not long ago, the Donaldson Network went about producing short films to tell his story. Our YouTube channel contains more than a dozen 3 to 5 minute films. If this story compels you, please take a look and how we are restoring his legacy one viewer at a time. It is time to return him to his rightful place in the eyes of history. In 2017, John Wesley Donaldson was inducted to the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. I encourage each one of you to contribute to this effort by letting people know John Donaldson's legacy belongs with the greatest to ever play the game. Here are a few examples of why we know this. John Donaldson is mentioned in different all-time Negro League polls as an all-time great in 11 consecutive decades. It isn't some weird guy who's just standing here in front of you telling you this today. They have been saying this for more than 120 years. We need to know this. From 1920 till today, the polls have told of the greatness of John Donaldson. In 2020, the Negro League celebrated the 100th anniversary by selecting an all-centennial team celebrated by the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City. Donaldson is one of only 2 pitchers not currently enshrined in Cooperstown. The centennial team was immortalized, and Donaldson was given a bobblehead to commemorate his many accomplishments. In 2006, the Hall of Fame had a special elections for contributors to the Negro Leagues. John Donaldson's name was one of 39 on the final ballot. He was left out when 17 others associated with Negro League Baseball received their calls to Cooperstown. In 2000 and again in 2021, he fell just 4 votes shy of induction. The 2006 and 2021 votes John Donaldson received designated him as worthy and separates him from many future candidates. Recently, the Hall of Fame announced another change in the process for election for Negro League players. Starting this fall, the first classic baseball era ballot containing both Major League and Negro League candidates will be considered on the same ballot. The legacies of segregated black ball players have waited long enough, and the formal process will occur every 3 years. I'm here to tell you that John Donaldson has a path to Cooperstown. With the support of local organizations, we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars and built John Donaldson Field in Glasgow, his hometown, which includes a statue of John Donaldson himself. We dedicated the statue and field safely in the fall of 2020 amid the ongoing pandemic. A moment in our history that continues to be felt to this very day. So who was John Donaldson? A major league quality player, a casualty of the color line, a baseball legend with known legacy for proof, a hometown hero, a video game phenomenon, a future Hall of Famer. But perhaps more importantly, John Donaldson was a man whose legacy is worthy of a little respect, our respect. What we have accomplished with the Donaldson Network has only begun his story of legacy restoration. John Donaldson was revered by baseball fans. In fact, the John Donaldson Jr. Baseball League operated in Kansas City for years. They knew his significance. A few years back, right here in Minneapolis, we helped start the John Donaldson Fall Baseball League. This past year, we saw over 150 participants, boys and girls from across the city, keeping his legacy alive and aiding our restoration efforts. John Donaldson's story is a window into so many other incredible stories of the integration of baseball. If it's St. Paul's Walter Ball, William Binga and Wilmer, George Wilson and Waseca, Harry Gillum and Wells, Big Bill Freeman and Cold Spring, these are integration stories. Bud Fowler was in Stillwater. Harry Earl was in Fairmont. Dave Brown was in Wanda. Webster McDonald was in Little Falls. Elmer Brandell was in Anoka. Integration stories. Chet Brewer was with the Crookston Pirates and Shorty Krogman and the Lismore Gophers. Sylvester Foreman and Bertha. Phil Reed's championship St. Paul Colored Gophers. Charlie Hancock in Sioux City, and even Satchel Paige in Bismarck. A man named Mitchell June integrated Brainerd. Chappie Johnson did the same in Long Prairie and Renville. These are the stories of the integration of baseball. John Donaldson was the agent of this change on the baseball fields across America. This man deserves our respect today. Thank you very much. Would you like the microphone?
Maybe one. Is there one question?
How are we doing time-wise?
We're about at the end, but.
Okay.
What, back there, yeah.
Nope.
First of all, thank you very much. We owe you a huge debt of gratitude for coming, and whoever brought you here, thank you to them as well. When I say the name Al Campanis, does that ring a bell with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, 1987, he was fired
Mhm.
because he made a statement in front of the cameras that
Mhm.
the reason there were no black managers, I guess there was one, I think Jackie Robinson was one of the first, but he said that their body density was such that they couldn't swim, and that was an example of why you could not have black managers in baseball.
Mhm.
Do you want to care to respond to that?
Well, there's been a perpetuation that African Americans in the game are less than for years. The insinuation that they didn't write about black people in the newspaper kept their legacies dormant for years. The fact is, until some weird guy from central Minnesota decided to go out and find 9,500 articles, you prove them wrong. And so over the years, there was always some excuse. They came up with another idea to bolster segregation. It may have been because somebody across town didn't like that, or the ownership didn't like that, or, right? It took a long time to integrate the game. But what I'm saying is that each of these players had a part in it. I talked to an old guy 20 years ago. He was from Bertha, and he said, Jackie Robinson, 1947, that wasn't a very big deal to us. We've been doing that for years, right? And there's a difference between the integration of baseball as we know it today and actually what happened. And I'm here to tell you that John Donaldson and many players like him made integration possible.
Pete, thank you so much. Fascinating presentation. I mentioned this drill. We've got a little book for you to sign. That we'll be donating that to the Way to Grow program and give it to a third grader so they can have a book signed by a leader in our community. And then we invite you to take this pen with you as a remembrance of your experience with us here today.
I use pens.
Perfect. I know you're a tech guy, AV, but pens are still good. So anyway, we invite you to return anytime as a visitor, check us out, or if you'd like to think about joining, we'd welcome you to that as well. So
Thank you so
very
much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You sign this again, please.
Thank you so much. I've never seen a great presentation where it just automatically advanced and that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Very good timing. I want to thank all who participated today. Jonathan Pine, thank you for being our greeter. Chris, thank you for being our day chair. Anna, great job today. Anna Koskeren, Brock and Greg, thank you for the AV. Oscar, thank you for doing your vocational today. And let me see, did I thank everyone? Jennifer, thank you for a wonderful reflection this morning. We raised today $447 this morning for CES. So thank you so much for all those donations. It's good to see you. Next week and the next 2 weeks, we are Zoom only. So don't come here for 2 weeks. We're going to be on Zoom only, and you aren't going to want to miss next week. We have Adam Dunnick, who is the new CEO of the Minneapolis Downtown Council. I've known Adam for a long time. You aren't going to want to miss that. So until next week, have a great Rotary week.